Welcome, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Conversations on Conflict. I'm your host, Ben Kreitzberg, and today I am joined by a special guest, Steve Shapiro, who is the current co-president of our board of directors here at the Conflict Resolution Center in Montgomery County. And I'm excited to talk to him today, talk to him a little bit about his background, what drew him into this field, and we'll take it from there. So Steve, thanks for joining me today. How are you feeling?
I'm feeling good, Ben.
All right.
Living in a pandemic, but I'm feeling good.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, I guess that's all you can ask for these days, right?
Yeah.
So I guess I'll just hop right into it. And the first thing I wanted to ask you about is your background in the field. So, what sparked your interest in conflict resolution, and what were some of those first steps you took initially to get where you are now?
Yeah, I think what sparked me was a partnership breakup, and I was in litigation at a pretty young age. And given the personal nature of the relationship and the level of risk that I had as a young father making this move and then having it turn sour, wind up in litigation, left me with a really bitter taste in my mouth about litigation. And the next thing I knew, I was working in the federal government. And it was right around the time that there was a small federal agency called the Administrative Conference of the United States. And they were responsible for passage of the Administrative Disputes Resolution Act, which became the umbrella statutory framework for all federal agencies to use alternative dispute resolution, including mediation, in employment disputes, contract disputes, tort disputes against the government. And so I was able to work with this administrative conference of the US and became a trainer and learned about ADR systems design, which sort of the notion of the three-legged stool is the concept of system design for dispute resolution. So you have an executive or a leadership in an organization who issues a policy saying we will use alternative dispute resolution to resolve all our employment disputes, let's say. And then there's a process, that's the second leg. First leg is the policy. Second leg is the process. So how are we going to do this? Mm-hmm. And then the third leg is actually the pilot, to begin to implement dispute resolution procedures. So it was really exciting. This is in the early 1990s, and training federal employees to become aware of this, because to encourage federal agencies to get a dispute resolution specialist. And so as I'm doing this, I got trained as a mediator, and I started mediating family cases in the circuit court in Montgomery County as I'm working in the federal space.
So kind of tying back to your initial reason you wanted to get in the space in the first place, right? Having some problems with that yourself.
Right. It was personal. And it was also makes for a compelling reason, because not only my litigation, but we see what was going on in the courts and the backlogs that were existing. And then over time, I served on the United States Postal Service panel, and I can't tell you how many cases I did there with the post office. But and I point to the post office because early on they were sort of a real trendsetter in coming up with a style of mediation called transformative mediation. And so I began learning about these nuances in what a mediator can do and can't do. And
mm-hmm. From process to process, you mean?
Actually, so between evaluative type mediation versus facilitator type mediation.
Yeah.
Transformative being sort of the two buzzwords is using recognition and empowerment as two qualities that the mediator brings to the process with the parties, so that the parties really feel heard, they really felt recognized and empowered. And the goal early on in this postal program was that the transformation doesn't just occur at the table with an employee and the employer or the manager, but it actually moves into the workplace, because these folks have drank the Kool-Aid. They really get that this is something, communication techniques
And it's effective. Yeah.
I could bring into the organization. So that was very exciting, until about 5 years later, when the Postal Service gave up on that concept and said, that's not happening.
That's interesting. So let me ask you about that. What in your opinion, what do you think led to that decision?
I think so in the Postal Service and many organizations, you have a union contract standing next to equal employment opportunity rules. And the unions are so strong in the Postal Service that often an employee EEO complaint is coupled with a labor union grievance. And so the grievance process has a certain momentum of its own. So even though we may be altruistic on the EEO side of the house, the labor union relationship could just continue to be an adversarial kind of process. And we had no control over that.
Gotcha.
So I think people who were trained in the transformative approach, I mean, I think a lot of people really embraced it who practiced it. And what's fascinating was I later got trained in something called transformative mediation, but it was at Harvard Law School, and it was the notion of, it was focused more from a confidentiality perspective, because confidentiality, we know in mediation, is critical to mediators.
Yeah, it's of paramount importance.
Yeah. And so this approach basically had, and it's in for commercial mediation too. It's not just employment or family, although it could be. But even in commercial settings, the parties and their counsel are together the whole time. There's no shuttling in this process, and the notion that when you shuttle, the mediator is carrying this confidential information, and if it's a complex commercial dispute, there's a lot of facts going back and forth, and the mediator, as a human being, could easily screw up, unintentional, but still put a crimp in the process if they share something that shouldn't be shared. Or so I found that actually where maybe I don't want to say intimidated by the law, but we know in mediation, it's kind of like you're learning every case. Every case is a new case. So so after I spent a number of years helping ADR get set up in the federal government, I began mediating complex energy disputes through the Energy Department, small agency called the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. And I began practicing this form of commercial transformative mediation. And then I realized that, kind of a little on a linear approach here, I left the government, hung up a shingle, began practicing on my own, started a organization called Resolution Matters, who provides mediation services, arbitration services. I began when I left the government, I began arbitrating energy disputes with the American Arbitration Association and a group called the International Center for Conflict Prevention and Resolution.
Gotcha. Yeah, so it's, you're doing all kinds of cases here now.
Yeah, I'm a Gemini, so I got these, multiple personality disorder thing where I could, and it's something that I appreciate about my being, that I have that flexibility.
Mm-hmm.
But
And then actually, let me ask you, now that
Yeah,
you've
go ahead.
sort of branched out into all of these different sort of larger scale conflicts, as you've been talking about, I know you still also do some of that family law, mediation and work with families. Is that still something that you're interested in, or where is your, because I guess there'd be two sides, right? There's, what makes up the majority of your business, and then what you enjoy the most.
That's a great question. And so I'll say that in 2016, there was an election that took place that kind of really rocked me a little bit. And right around that same time, I began studying about trauma and the relationship between trauma and conflict. Mm-hmm. And after now 4 or 5 years of studying this area, have really come to the conclusion that the two are intertwined, and that often conflict surfaces because of some earlier sets of trauma. And so that the people who are in conflict often don't even know, they don't have that wherewithal, because when we're in trauma and we're triggered, we're in a reactive state. And when we're in a reactive state, emotional levels get higher, and you become a little more irrational, and much more difficult, even for a mediator in that type of situation, to really try to calm things down and get folks working together. So that moved me back into the family realm, and really wanting to practice this work, because I've been a meditator almost my whole adult life. And one of the programs that I took with William Ury, who is the founder of the Harvard Negotiation Project, and also the author of Getting to Yes.
I was gonna say, it's the book almost everyone in our field, I feel like, has read at this point.
Right, and so he, given where we are in the world right now of conflict, his thought process has expanded, which I think we've always kind of touched on, but that's the health of the mediator. So it's a notion that if a mediator is going into a conflict situation, where's the mediator's well-being in relation to that? And so if I'm in a family situation and I'm dealing with a husband whose father died when he was 3 years old, and didn't have that type of paternal guidance. My father was really sick when I was 8 years old. So without this kind of awareness, I might get really triggered when I hear these stories of someone losing their father or not having that guidance. And I can't, so there's something called co-regulation, which I really begin breathing with that individual. I begin kind of working. We're just in sync. There's the notion that we're like two trains running, and if someone who's in a reactive state and is triggered, they may be running at 70, 80 miles an hour. And if I'm sort of in my normal resting pulse, I'm at 40 or 50 miles an hour. We're not in sync. Yeah. But somehow we have to get the trains running together.
That's interesting. So you're kind of taking some of those meditation techniques into the conflict resolution process.
Very much so.
I like
Very
that.
much so. And I'm not the first. I mean, there have been many other, mindfulness type practices, but Ben, it's been something that I just love doing. And it's something that I recognize that I'll be doing for the rest of my life, because it's just
Yeah, that's
what
no,
I
that's
have.
great. Yeah, and actually, so that sparks a new question for me. Let me ask you, on behalf of the viewers watching, what are your favorite personal techniques that you use when you start to feel that onset of emotions coming on that may have been sparked by some conflict you're experiencing?
Well, the first thing is, I guess it depends on the situation, but always a good idea to separate myself. Always a good idea to not respond right away. Always a good idea to kind of just really feel into what's getting triggered and to give it space. So back to the situation of the fathers, for me, the realization that I've given myself a lot of opportunity to heal around sort of my own father's situation and my relationship with him, but it also as much as it's healed, it also evolves, and so it becomes my superpower too, because that was a critical moment in my life as an 8-year-old kid where my dad's like in the hospital for a month and I have no idea what's going on, and my mother's freaking out, and how are we going to pay the bills and everything else. So the superpower is really relating to people who experience loss, who experience grief, who, I can just really have a huge amount of empathy for what they're going through, and realize that. So in terms of what I do is I do meditate, and I often teach in a class on dealing with difficult people the notion of going to the balcony, and it's also a leadership concept. So you become the observer. You build and you build this sense of capacity to be with the person who you're having a difficult time with, and in our imagination, we could begin really listening to what they're struggling with or what their grievances with me, and in my imagination, I could begin to hear it. And there's something magical that happens where there's something in the space. There's something in, I don't want to say in the psychic world or the electromagnetic world, but there's something that's transferring that begins to change the molecular energy, so that when I show up with the clients, in most cases, not all the time, but in most cases, something has already happened, and we come into the room more in sync. As we said, the trains are running together, and there's a deeper level of mutual understanding taking place. So it's I mean, I always put a lot of weight and importance on the not so much the intake, although it's part of the intake, but the beginning stages of the mediation, because that's when relationship is happening. It's when trust is happening. It's when you're building rapport. And I think if we as mediators can do that as effectively as we can, we're covering a lot of ground at that stage.
I could not agree more. I think that I would say probably I'd give the same answer if I'm talking about what the most important thing is, during that process, is to make sure that understanding is being brought about and taking place. And being able to do that right in the beginning is definitely hard to do, but incredibly effective in getting that resolution in the long run.
Yeah.
Well, Steve, I want to thank you so much again for hopping on and spending some of your time with me here today. Before I let you go, though, I'd like to ask you one more question. And that's going to be, what does peace in the community look like to you?
You know, one thing I didn't mention, Ben, was I also had an opportunity in my career to be part of ADR in Maryland coming into existence. And when MACRO, the Maryland Conflict Resolution Office, was at its inception, and there may be some in the office, I can't remember, but we created posters that were going on in buses and public areas, advertising mediation as a way to resolve community conflict. And I think that's, to me, kind of really stands out as what it means to experience peace in the community. It's where and I think CRCMC really does stand for it as well, clearly, that it's peace is occurring, peace is happening at every level of society, from the police department to the prison, to the school yard, to the government office, to the family. And there's just a sense of going back to the trauma piece. I think real peace occurs when there's more aptitude for listening and healing each other's trauma, because we're at a place societally where something dramatic really has to happen if we're going to get ourselves on the right course for solving climate change, solving so many of the problems that we're facing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That was beautifully put, Steve. I appreciate you.
Appreciate you too, Ben.
Yeah.
And the work you're doing.
Sorry.
I appreciate you and the work you're doing for the organization.
Of course. Thank you, Steve. And for all the viewers, I'll leave the information for Steve's business, the resolution matters, that'll all be in the description below. And thank you all again for tuning in today. If you'd like to learn more about the Conflict Resolution Center in Montgomery County and our programs and the services that we're able to provide for free for folks throughout the county, you can visit us online at www.crcmc.org. And if you'd like to make a generous donation to our organization to help fund the programs and the projects to ensure that we can continue providing all our services, you can do that at crcmc.org/donate now. Thanks again, Steve. I appreciate you. And thanks for everybody watching. And until next time, have a good one.
Thank you, Ben.
Take care.
You too.